is. But before that, after the show tonight, go to YouTube and subscribe to the BarRoom Project show. And then go to the Kiss Rock Review and subscribe to that as well on YouTube. Get those subscriptions up. Maybe we can be live on YouTube sometime instead of just tape delay.
Yes, we can't do it with the phones.
Right.
Unless we have over 1,000. We have 1,000 viewers, or subscribers.
Yeah. You need to have 1,000 subscribers to go live on YouTube.
Okay, so I've been putting these little videos out on Kiss Rock Review and about guessing what my theme is going to be. And no one's guessed yet so far. I think I mentioned it last show, but I don't know if anyone's ever has guessed. So tonight's topic is 1971 albums, and I picked this because I was born in '71, and all the albums that I'm going to talk about are hitting 50 years old. And just so you know, this is not a list of the best albums from 1971. It's just albums that I have and like.
And one that Christine wanted.
And one that Christine wanted, so I actually bought it, so now I have it, so it's still true.
Sweet.
Yes. But, there's some really good albums from 1971 that I don't have. For example, I don't have Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. I don't have Parliament Funkadelic's Maggot Brain, which is 50 years old. I don't have Traffic's Low Spark of High Heeled Boys, which is 50 years old. And there's some albums I thought were 50, but they were either 1970 or 1972. For example, Neil Young's After the Gold Rush is 1972. Derek and the Dominoes, Layla and Other Sort of Love Songs is 1970. So I'm not going to talk about that, but we'll start with my list here. And this is no particular order. It's not best album from 1971, my favorite to least from 1971. Just the order I wrote the stuff down in when I was doing research today. So, number 1, Van Morrison, Tupelo Honey, released in October 1971. And he was actually in Woodstock. He lived in Woodstock for a while, even though he's originally from Northern Ireland, when he wrote the music for this. And originally this was going to be a country album. And you can even, if you listen to it, you can hear the sort of the country-ish feel to it, but it's eventually, it's Van Morrison folkish rock stuff. But he left Woodstock because after the movie Woodstock, too many people were coming around, they were losing that rural feel. Went to California, recorded this album, but one of the songs on it is Old Woodstock, Tupelo Honey. The big hit from this song is Wild Night. You guys remember that? And also, John Cougar Mellencamp Camp covered that in the 90s or 80s.
Yes, with a really good female bass player. Don't remember her name.
Yeah.
She was fantastic.
But 50 years old in October, Tupelo Honey, and the title track, Tupelo Honey, is really awesome too. I've seen Government Mule cover that song. So, check that one out. Next up, of course, as I mentioned, the Allman Betts Band. But another album that's 50 years old is from the Allman Betts Band's dads, which is, and I just dropped my notes, Live at the Fillmore East, or it's actually called At Fillmore East, which was their breakthrough album. Hang on a second, let me get my notes. At Fillmore East was released in July 1971, so it's going to hit its 50th year this year, but it was actually recorded in March, 2 shows. And it was originally a double album, but they only charged a single album price for it. And in 2004, this album was selected for preservation in the Library of Congress. So if you go to the Library of Congress, you can actually, I don't know if you can take anything out of the Library of Congress, but this is the Library of Congress.
You need a library
card, yes. So basically, the reason they recorded this live album, and it was the first Allman Brothers album to go gold. They recorded it live because they felt their studio albums didn't quite capture their sound, because Greg Allman even said, how do you capture the Allman Brothers sound in 3.5 minutes? So of course, you got a good, nice, long set in this one, and Statesboro Blues does not appear on an Allman Brothers studio album, but it appears on this. They also did Hot Lana, which is a nice instrumental, and Stormy Monday, but this is sort of a bookend to part of their careers, because right as this album went gold in October 1971, Duane Allman passed away. So it's sort of a bittersweet. They were finally getting their recognition, and then their leader passed away in a motorcycle accident. But I think you should all check out Allman Brothers at the Fillmore East, and some of the stuff that they recorded at the Fillmore East they would later put on their next album, Brothers and Sisters. And of course, this is, Christine said I had to do this one. Sticky Fingers by the Rolling Stones.
Yeah.
And if you actually got the original vinyl, in the original vinyl, this album cover was designed by Andy Warhol. The original vinyl album cover, you could actually unzip the jeans on the front cover, but then they discovered that it damaged the album when you did that. So on subsequent pressings of the album and on the CD and on the cassette and on the 8-track, I probably suppose too, you couldn't unzip the zipper on it.
8-track, now there's something.
I didn't mention the reel to reel though.
Oh, yeah.
This was, by the way, this is the first studio album where they had Mick Taylor as the lead guitarist after Brian Jones left the band. And it's a sort of a return to their rock roots because they did a bunch of psychedelic stuff, competing with the Beatles. They had Let It Bleed, Beggar's Banquet, their Satanic Majesty Request, and when they came out with this one in 71, more basic rock and sort of there's even a country feel on this.
Great album.
Yeah.
Great album.
Weren't we earlier talking about Brown Sugar or something like that going on? We weren't talking about the song, but we mentioned Brown Sugar. But anyway, this is the album that features Brown Sugar. It also has Wild Horses, which is a country song.
Yeah, it's a beautiful song.
Can't You Hear Me Knocking?
That's one of my favorites. I love that.
And I love to say this because I get to swear. The song Bitch is on here. And since we had Mike in here, Dead Flowers is also on Sticky Fingers.
That's good too.
So if you want a sort of a more rock and roll Stones album after they did all their psychedelic stuff in the late 60s, check out Sticky Fingers.
Yes, please.
And then the next one after this, by the way, is Exile on Main Street, which is sort of their classic they're judged by. But I like this one better than Exile. So
Me too.
So next up, since we were talking about Woodstock before, why don't we go to the band that actually lived in Woodstock? The Band with Cahoots. September 1971.
Nice.
And I was reading that this actually got mixed reviews when it first came out, and I'm like, what were the music critics thinking if they're giving the band mixed reviews? I mean, this opens with Life is a Carnival. And When I Paint My Masterpiece is on here. Plus Van Morrison, who was living in Woodstock when this was recorded, he has a guest vocal on this. And Levon Helm's wife, or not wife, common law wife, she is the first, and as far as I know, only woman to ever sing on a band album, and she's does background vocals on this. So, check this out. Cahoots by the Band from 1971. Next up, another one. Speaking of female backing vocals, or this is female lead vocals here, Pearl by Janis Joplin came out in 71. This was the last album that she was involved with in her life. She actually died during the recording of this album.
That is a great album.
Yeah.
I love that album.
And I flip my notes on here. So this was released, she died in October 1970. This album came out in January 1971. And there are 2 songs on this album that actually are incomplete, that they were in the process of recording when she died. One is Buried Alive with the Blues. They only recorded the instruments for it. They never recorded her vocals. The other is Mercedes-Benz. They only recorded the vocals, so it's a cappella. They never recorded the instrumentation for it. And they decided to leave those as she had them, as sort of a tribute to her. But of course, you know the hits on this one, Me and Bobby McGee, which was Chris Christopherson wrote, and then Move On. So, check it out. The last album that Janis Joplin recorded during her life. It was actually the Doors producer, Paul Rothchild, helped produce this album. Next up, as I flip my notes over, if you've watched my rock review, the stuff that I do outside of the BarRoom Neon Project, I had a segment called Kit Hits 50, where I talked about the bands that I listened to that sort of influenced me while I was growing up. And I mentioned that I was a big fan of The Who. But I don't have a lot of their Who albums, because my best friend is even a bigger fan of The Who. And so whenever I wanted to listen to The Who, I just borrowed the cassette from him. But I do have, this is my favorite rock album by The Who. Who's Next? The Who, I love Tommy, I love Quadrophenia, I love their rock operas, but sometimes I think they go a little overboard, the rock operas. But this is just a great rock album, Who's Next? And this was originally conceived as a concept album by Pete Townsend. He had this idea of sort of a multimedia experience with video and film and concerts and audio recordings. But the problem was in 1970, 71, when they recorded this, the technology was a little limited. So they got frustrated with it, and eventually they gave up that whole multimedia experience and just came out with one great album. but just so you know, you probably know the big hits on this were Won't Get Fooled Again, Behind Blue Eyes, the song Baba O'Reilly, which everyone knows by the refrain Teenage Wasteland, is on here. An interesting fact I found out when doing a little research is the guitar that Pete Townsend plays on this album is a 1957 Gretchen, and that was given to him by Joel Walsh. But there's a bunch of other songs besides Behind Blue Eyes, besides Won't Get Fooled Again, besides Bob O'Reilly. There's My Wife, which is John Entwistle's song that he contributed, the bass player. Bargain, Going Mobile, Love Ain't for Keeping, all on this. I love this album. So if you have to get one Who album and you don't want to get Tommy or Quadrophenia of the Rock operas, get Who's Next. Okay? As you also guys know from following me, I'm a big, huge Genesis fan. I got tickets to see Genesis this fall in Buffalo and in Boston. And 1971, Genesis came out with Nursery Crime. This is the first album that features their classic 70s lineup. They had the original members, Peter Gabriel, Tony Banks, and Mike Rutherford. And they added 2 new members for this album. One guy named Steve Hackett on lead guitar. And another guy you maybe have heard of, a little minor guy called Phil Collins. First album that he did as the drummer for Genesis was Nursery Crime. But this does not sound like those poppy Phil Collins albums from the 80s. You're not going to hear a song like, what's that song he did in Tarzan? You'll Be in My Heart is not going to appear on this. This album sounds a lot like if you picture the Peter Gabriel solo albums, the weirdest stuff you can picture from Peter Gabriel's solo album with a Tony Banks keyboard solo in it, that's what this stuff sounds like. I mean, after all, one of the songs on this album is called Return of the Giant Hogweed. That's not going to be played at, I don't think, at a Phil Collins concert anytime soon. But I have heard that Genesis on the reunion plans is actually practicing the musical box, which is the opening track of this. So hopefully when I see them, they'll be playing the musical box from Nursery Crime. Okay. All right, I still got a whole bunch here to go. Second half of my pile coming up. So we'll start that with The Doors, An L.A. Woman. This was released in April 1971, so this came out a month before I was born. It's the last Doors album with Jim Morrison. And most of the songs on this album, the Doors never played live because Jim Morrison died before it came out. There are a few that they played live. They did some festivals in 1970, but a lot of them they didn't play live. So, and for the most part, it has a very blues rock sort of feel. It's got songs on it like Been Down So Long or The Wasp. That's Texas and the Big Beat. It's got some non-blues rock songs. Riders on the Storm is on here. I love that piano opening to Riders on the Storm, by the way. So, Doors, last album with Jim Morrison. Oh, Joe's touching the camera.
Don't just see if there are any comments.
Okay. Next up, I flip over my notes. Crazy Horse by Crazy Horse. This was Neil Young's backing band for his album Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere. And in 1970, Neil Young went on tour with these guys called Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And so Crazy Horse didn't have anything to do, so what did? They recorded their own album called Crazy Horse. And for that album, they recruited a young guitarist named Nils Lofgren. If you don't know who Nils Lofgren is, he's currently the lead guitarist of the E Street Band. But this album, I love this album. Songs on it, Downtown, which Neil Young later recorded with Crazy Horse. Dirty Dirty, I'll Get By, and there's sort of a biggish kind of hit on this. It's called I Don't Want to Talk About It, which was later recorded by Rod Stewart. It's not a song you want to listen to if you ever break up with anybody. I almost thought about bringing my ukulele and playing it, but I don't know what people are feeling out there. I don't know if anyone's broken up with their girlfriends and want to bring them down, and plus, you don't want to hear me sing. But if you look up Crazy Horse by Crazy Horse, awesome album. Buy it. Crazy Horse needs some love, even when they're not with Neil Young. Next up, we have The Faces, Long Player. If you don't know the history of The Faces began as a psychedelic pop band in the late 60s called Small Faces, and their lead singer, guitarist, was Steve Marriott. He left in the early 70s to form a band called Humble Pie with Peter Frampton. but the rest of the Small Faces wanted to continue, so they got this guy named Rod Stewart to be their new singer, and another guy named Ronnie Wood to be their lead guitarist. Ronnie Wood later joined the Rolling Stones. And in 1971, they had 2 albums. One of them was Long Player. And they also changed the name from the Small Faces to the Faces. This has a couple. They covered Paul McCartney's Baby I'm Amazed on this album. Had Me a Real Good Time is on this album. My favorite song on this album is called Sweet Lady Mary. They did come out with another album in 1971 as well, but this is sort of my favorite of the 2 they came out with. Later, they would come out with an album called Ooh La La. You've probably heard from that one. It has that song, Ooh La La, I Wish I Didn't Know Now. But they also became they were famous for becoming a very party band. They would pass out free bottles of wine at their concerts. Okay, next we're going to go to a little Elton John here. Elton John, Madman Across the Water. This is one of 3 albums he released in 1971. He also released Tumbleweed Connection and an album called 11-17-70, which was a live album. Guess what? It was recorded on November 17th, 1970. All the songs on this album are the music is by Elton John, the lyrics are by his lyricist, Bernie Taupin. And the best known songs, of course, are Tiny Dancer. If you remember the movie Almost Famous, there's a famous scene where they're all in the bus driving down the highway, all singing Tiny Dancer.
That's a good movie.
Leave On is on this album. And by the way, I found out that Leave On is named, even though the character isn't based on him, they took the name from Levon Helm, the band. But there's some other good songs. Indian Sunset, which is about the destruction of Native American culture, is on here. Razorface and Madman Across the Water, the title track. So check out Elton John, Madman Across the Water. I've got 2 more, if the band is going to get ready, I've got 2 more albums to go through.
We're actually going to have you, when you're done, move your stuff, and I'm going to interview Mike, and then we're going to finish out with the jam.
Okay, so another album from 1971. You all know it. You all know the title cut. John Lennon, Imagine, right? Imagine all the people living life in peace. But there's more to that album than that song. There's some other political songs on there. I Don't Want to Be a Soldier. Give Me Some Truth, which is about Richard Nixon. Some personal songs on here. Crippled Inside. A song called Jealous Guy, which was originally a Beatles song called Child of Nature. And it was originally sort of thought of for the White Album. A song called Oh Yoko. I wonder where John got an idea for a song called Oh Yoko. And a song called How Do You Sleep, which was he and Paul McCartney were having a feud. So John Lennon wrote a song about it called How Do You Sleep. And this is also, even though it's a John Lennon solo album, George Harrison appears on like almost half the songs on this album. So it's almost like 1.25 Beatles album on here. So John Lennon, Imagine. The last album I want to talk about is this one from 1971, David Crosby, If I Could Only Remember My Name. As many of you probably know, 1970, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young released Deja Vu, and immediately that was such a big success that all 4 members released solo albums in either 1970 or 1971. Stephen Stills released his self-titled debut album, which has Love the One You're With on it. Neil Young released After the Gold Rush in 1970. Graham Nash had an album in 71 called Songs for Beginners. I've never been a big Graham Nash fan. David Crosby came out with this in 1971, If I Could Only Remember My Name. And even though it's a David Crosby, it's credited to David Crosby. See, it says David Crosby on the... It's really more of David Crosby with the Grateful Dead, Neil Young, and Graham Nash. The lead song on this is called Music Is Love. It basically started Graham Nash, David Crosby, Neil Young were in the studio just jamming. David Crosby started improvising some lyrics. And afterwards, that was nice, but I don't know what I'm going to do with it. Then later he found out that Graham Nash and Neil Young took the master tapes, put vibes, put percussion on it, gave it back to him and said, that's going to be the lead song on your album. There's another song on this called Song With No Words, which is Crosby and Nash doing some vocal harmonies, but just going da-da-da, da-da-da-da, and with Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead and Jack Cassidy of Jefferson Airplane Hot Tuna providing the backing for it. And my favorite song on this album is called What Are Their Names, which is David Crosby with the Grateful Dead. And I'm actually going to read those lyrics because, you know, in the violent times today, I think it's sort of an anti-war song. And in the violent times today, I'm directing this at the leaders of both Israel and Palestine. So the words go, I wonder who they are, the men who really run this land. And I wonder why they run it with such a thoughtless hand. What are their names, and on what street do they live? I'd like to ride right over and give them a piece of my mind about peace for mankind. Peace is not an awful thing to ask. And I'm going to end with that. From all the world leaders, peace is not an awful thing to ask. You know, you may say I'm a dreamer, but you know what? I'm not the only one.
No, you're not. We're all.
All right.